Good morning, girls. Hope everyone is safe at home. Okay, now in this revision session, I want to revise few object-oriented concepts. The main reason for revising object-oriented concepts is, has already we know that the design process, in order to achieve the design activity, generally we do follow two different approaches. One is the procedural oriented approach or functional oriented approach, and the other one is object oriented approach. So depending on our implementation programming language, we either go for functional oriented approach software design or object oriented approach software design. Okay, so in the previous revision classes we had revised how object functional oriented design approach can be done. Okay, so now it's time to discuss about object oriented design process. So before we start with object oriented design process, I feel that it's better to revise few object oriented concepts. Okay, now let us begin with this basic object oriented concepts. So generally, in the recent years, object oriented software development style has become very popular and is at present widely being used in industries as well as in academic circles. The main reason for the much popularity of this object oriented programming languages or object oriented concepts is the abstraction, the levels of abstraction whatever they provide, and because of which it is leading to the understandability, because of which the designers are able to generate good designs. If at all the designers are able to generate good designs, then obviously we can implement it much easier. Okay, so because of certain reasons, this object oriented concepts has gained much popularity when compared to the procedural oriented software design. Okay, now generally a model is constructed, that is a design model is constructed by focusing only on the few aspects of the problem and ignoring the rest. The model of a problem is called as analysis model, and the model of solution is called design model. This design model is usually obtained by carrying out iterative refinements to the analysis model using a design methodology. In the context of model construction, the difference between modeling language and design process must be known. That is, it's important for us to know what is the difference between a modeling language and a design process. So generally we use modeling language in order to generate the models, in order to generate the designs for our software which is going to be developed. And if at all we are following some design process is nothing but a systematic procedure in order to convert our analysis model into the design model, that is into a design solution. Okay, so that is the difference between the modeling language and the design process. Okay, a modeling language consists of a set of notations using which design and analysis models are documented. Okay, this is completely related to documentation of design and analysis models, whereas design process is converting, it is converting the a problem description into a design solution. In simple terms, the design process is converting the SRS document into the design solution. Okay, so here we will be applying some step by step procedures. Generally, a model can be documented using a modeling language such as unified modeling language. So most probably we'll be making use of UML language in order to generate the designs whenever our implementation programming language is a object oriented one. That means we use object oriented design process. Okay. So these are the important concepts which we need to revise, like some basic mechanisms like objects, object relations, classes, inheritance, and methods, and few key concepts like abstraction, polymorphism, encapsulation, method overriding, genericity, composite objects. Okay, these are the very key concepts of any object oriented programming language. And we should also discuss some related terms like agents, widgets, persistence. So generally these we come across these terminologies whenever we go for the user interface. That is, while developing any graphical user interface, we come across these terminologies. Okay. Now let us begin with the basic mechanisms related to the object oriented concepts. So first we need to discuss about the object. Okay. What is an object? So it's obviously a real world entity, or it can be any conceptual entity. An object can be any real world entity or conceptual entity. It may be either an employee, a book. So these are the examples of real world entity. It can be any controller or manager. So it is a kind of conceptual entity. Okay. So the advantage of considering the system as set of objects is, so whenever we are going for object oriented design process, we considered our system as a set of objects. So first thing is we need to identify the objects. Okay. And the main reason, that is main advantage of considering a system as a set of objects is, when the system is analyzed, developed and implemented in terms of objects, it becomes easy to understand the design and implementation of the system, because the objects provide an excellent decomposition of a large problem into small parts. So whenever a big problem is decomposed into sub problems, then we can understand that problem much easier. Okay. If at all we are able to understand it, then obviously we will be able to implement it in a simple steps. Okay. So that's the main advantage of considering a system as a set of objects, and that's the beauty of object oriented programming language. Okay. So here each object, as we know, each object consists of a data and a set of functions. The data related to the object is termed as an attributes, and the functions of an object is termed as a methods or operations. So in object oriented terminology, like object contains attributes and methods. Okay. So here sometimes we can interchangeably use methods or operations, but there is a slight difference between a method and operation. Okay. What is that means? Generally an operation is the responsibility of a class, and a method is used to implement that responsibility. Okay. So that is the difference between a method and operation, but maximum we interchangeably use this method or operation. Okay. Next, coming to the data of an object, that is attributes. So generally the attributes or the data of an object can only be accessed by the methods of an object. For example, if at all any external object wants to make use of the information or the data of an object, then it can access only through the invocation of the methods of that object. Okay. And this is called as a data hiding or data abstraction. This data hiding or data abstraction will leads to high cohesion and low coupling among objects. Do you remember what is the advantage of high cohesion and low coupling? So this will lead to the understandability nature of a design process. Okay. So this data hiding is helping us to have a high cohesion and low coupling among the objects. Indirectly it is leading to the understandability. If at all the design process is understandable, then obviously it can be easily implementable. Okay. So this is a simple model of an object. So here the model, here in this object we are having certain data, and this data is surrounded by methods. That means all these methods are just hiding the data. They are acting like a boundary wall for the data. Only by invoking certain methods we can access the data of an object. Okay. So for example, if you consider an object, it is a library member. A library member can have certain data or information or attributes like the name of the member, membership, address, phone number, email address, a date when admitted as a member, membership expiry date, books issued. Okay. So these are the attributes of the library member object. Now let us see what are the methods. The operations or methods supported by library member object are issue book, find books issued, find books overdue, return book, find membership details. Okay. Now let us move to the class. So as already we know that a class is nothing but a collection of similar objects. Okay, so it is a template for object creation. A class is considered as an abstract data type because a class supports the abstract data and the data type mechanisms of an ADD, that is abstract data type. What is this abstract data again? The data of an object can be accessed only through its methods. The abstract data is nothing but the data of an object can be accessed only through its method. A data type. A data type defines a collection of data values and a set of predefined operations on those values. Thus, a data type can be instantiated to create a variable of that type, and we can instantiate class into objects. So therefore a class is a data type. Okay, so a class is a abstract data type. It is providing the abstract data and the data type. So it is a ADT. For example, if you consider the methods in a library management system for a library member, the operations such as create, issue, return, etc., supported by an object, that is a library member, are implemented in the form of methods. So, as I said you, this that is the difference between the operation and method. Operations are the responsibilities, and these responsibilities are implemented by methods. Okay. The implementation of a responsibility of a class through multiple methods with same method name is called method overloading. That's nothing but executing the same method in different manners is called as method overloading. For example, a class provides three definitions for create operation. In one definition, just int create, that means there are no parameters for the create method. In another class, just create is given some parameter like radius. In another one, the create is given three parameters, that is x, y, radius. Okay, so here we are implementing the same method, but the same method is implementing three different manners. In one manner, that is in first way, we are not giving any parameters, it is taking some default parameter, and in the second one it is taking one parameter, that's nothing but the radius, and in the third one it is taking three parameters. Okay, so that's what method overloading is. So this mechanism of message passing would lead to weak coupling among objects. So this is an example of class diagram. So this is how we represent the class diagrams in the UML model. So these are the three different ways. Okay, so in the first one, just we represented the class diagram just by giving a class name. We had not mentioned its attributes and methods, but in the second representation we had given a class name and the methods, that is the operations of that class. And in the third one we are representing both the class name, its attributes and methods or operations. Okay, so generally we use this third methodology, that is we generally represent the class diagrams by using its class name, attributes and methods. Okay, now let us discuss about the class relationships. That is the relation, there will be some relationship between the classes, between the identified classes in any project or in any software system. Okay, the first one is the inheritance, next one is the association, next one is aggregation and composition, and the last one is the dependency. So first let us start with the inheritance. So as already we know, inheritance, what do you mean by inheritance? Inheriting the properties of a class to the another class, that is inheriting the properties from the base class to the derived class. This inheritance feature allows to define a new class by extending or modifying the existing class. Here the original class is called as a base class or a superclass or a parent class. And a new class which is obtained by deriving the properties of the existing class is called as a derived class or subclass or child class. The base class is said to be a generalization of its derived class. That means the base class should contain only those properties that are common to all its derived classes. That is, the parent class should have all the common properties that its children should have. It should not contain any other properties. So, generally it won't contain any other properties. Okay, so that base class is said to be generalization of its derived class. Each derived class can be considered as a specialization of its base class because it modifies or extends the basic properties of the base class in certain ways. That means the inheritance relationship can be viewed as a generalization specialization relationship. Generalization, you can find this generalization at the parent class and specialization at the child. Okay, the child class is a specialized version of the generalized class. Okay, a derived class may even redefine a method which already exists in the base class. So it not only modifies the properties of the base class, but it can also have right to modify the methods of already existing methods of the base class, and this mechanism is called as method overriding. And the advantages of this inheritance are it helps us to have a code reuse, simplicity of program design. Okay, let us see how we can have the code reuse. So, obviously here the subclass is inheriting the properties of the uh, parent class or the base class. So that's what the reusability is. So already we had defined certain properties or certain attributes and methods for a class. Now what we are doing, whatever the required methods that can be used in the next level, that is in the lower level, those we are inheriting from the parent class. Okay, that's what the code reusability is. Next, simplicity of program design. It reduces the number of independent features of different classes. So understanding of the different classes becomes possible, right? So this is an example of inheritance. Okay, here in the top level we are having a library member. Okay, here library member is the base class, and faculty, students and staff are the derived classes of the library member. And coming to the next level, undergraduate, postgraduate and research scholar can be the derived classes for the student class. Okay, so that means here faculty, students and staff had inherited the properties of library member, and at the same time undergraduate, postgraduate and research scholar had inherited the properties of the student class. So in this example, the library member is the base class. So and base class for the derived classes for faculty, student and staff. Okay, and here the inheritance relationship is represented using a directed arrow drawn from a derived class to its base class. So if you observe, so here from the derived class we are drawing a line, and that line is having a directed arrow which is pointing towards the base class. Okay, so this is the symbol which is used for representing the inheritance relationship. And next comes multiple inheritance. A multiple inheritance is a mechanism in which a subclass can inherit attributes and methods from more than one class. That means it is having more than one parent class. If at all a child class is inheriting the methods and properties from more than one parent class, then that kind of inheritance is called as a multiple inheritance. For example, if you consider research scholar, in certain organization the research scholar can also be an employee in that organization. That means he can be both a staff that is, he can inherit some features of the staff, and at the same time he can also inherit some features of the students. For example, if you consider certain properties or attributes like roll number, name, student name, student details, class, certain subjects, etc. Okay, so all these properties can are inherited by research scholar from students class. And since this research scholar may also be an employee of the college of that or of that institution, he can have certain properties of staff class like employee name, employee ID, salary, so on. Okay, so that means here the research scholar is inheriting the features, the properties from the student class and from the staff class. Okay, so this is an example for multiple inheritance. Next relation is association relation. So it is a common type of relation that exists among various classes. When two classes are associated, they can take each other's help to serve users' request. It enables the object to communicate with each other by invoking the methods. That means whenever any two classes are communicating just to share the data or just by invoking the methods, then there exists an association relationship between them. Why? Because they need the services of the other class. Thus, one object must know the identity of the corresponding object in the association. Generally, this association between the classes can be binary, but it can also be a unary, that is, a single class may be associated with itself, or it can be a binary. One class may be associated to the other class, or it can be ternary, where a class is associated with two different classes. For example, if you consider this figure, the student. Okay, so in a student class, we will be having multiple student objects, right? So these students may be friends. That means a student is a friend of a student. Okay, so that is an example for unary association. Next comes binary association. So let us consider we are having two classes. One is a student class and the other one is a elective subject class. Okay, obviously a student will register to any elective subject. When this student class is associated with elective subject, now the elective subject will know certain details of the student like the student name, a student roll number, right? So certain details, that is the certain properties of the student are now known to the elective subject object. And at the same time, certain methods like print name, print roll number, okay, those methods can be assessed, those methods of student class can now be assessed by the elective subject. So in this manner, here both the classes are sharing or showing their identity with each other, or sharing their identity. Okay, the elective object knows the details of the student object, and at the same time the student will know the details of the elective subject. Okay, so in this case we can say that a student is associated with the elective subject, and in order to represent the association we can make use of a single line. Okay, and coming to the ternary association. In ternary association, there will be association between three different classes. For example, a person books a ticket for a show. So now, whenever a person books a ticket for a show, the person related details are represented in the ticket, and the show related information is also represented in the ticket. Okay, so now a person has booked a ticket. So in the ticket, the person related information will be there. For what he had booked? For a show. Okay, so in this manner, these three classes can be associated to each other. That means there is a ternary relationship between the person, ticket and show. We can also represent the association by using an arrowhead and by indicating the multiplicity also. That means an arrowhead can be used along with name, which indicates the direction of association. In order to indicate the direction of association and multiplicity, we can use it in this manner. Okay, so here the book is borrowed by library member. That is, a book is associated with the library member. So we can represent the association just by a line, and on that line just mention what kind of association is. Okay, that is just the name of association and towards which class it is associating. At that side put the arrowhead. Okay, and at the same time we can also use multiplicity, which indicates the number of instances taking part in the association. Number of instances in the sense how many number of objects of that particular class are taking part in that association. For example, if you consider a book class, okay, multiple books can be borrowed by a library member. Okay, so if at all library member is restricted to borrow only one book, then here we can use, instead of asterisk symbol, here we can have a 1. That is, 1-to-1 relationship exists between a book and library member. But that restriction is not there, right? So if the library member is a faculty, then the faculty is having a right to borrow any number of books. Okay, so in that case we can represent a star here. A star indicates the more than one. Okay, next comes association and link. So when two classes are associated, we are saying that there is an association between two classes. Okay, when two classes are associated, then the two objects of those classes can have a link. That's nothing but a relationship between the classes is an association, and a relationship between those corresponding objects is nothing but a link. That is, a link is a relationship between the objects and association is the relationship between the classes. So that means we can say that association describes a group of similar links. And link can be considered as an instance of association relation. These links can be dynamically created and destroyed as a run of a system procedure. An association between two classes simply means that 0 or more links may be present among the objects of the associated classes at any time during execution. Next relation is aggregation and composition relationship. So coming to the aggregation and composition relationship, this represent a part or whole relationship among the objects. That means a class may be a part of another class, or a class may be taken a whole part of the other class. Okay, in that case we can say there is an aggregation and composition relationship between those classes. Here the objects which contain other objects are called composite objects. The object which contains other objects are called composite objects. For example, a book object can have up to 10 chapters. So here what is the composite object? So in this case book object is said to be composed of up to 10 chapter objects. That means a book is a composite object. Why? Because it is a composition of other objects. And this relationship can be read as a book has up to 10 chapter objects. For this reason, this relationship is also known as a relationship. This aggregation and composition relationship can also be termed as a relationship. Why? Because an object is having another object. Okay, it can occur in a hierarchy of levels. That is, an object contained in another object may itself contain some other object. Okay, so that example we can see in the next slide. So this is how we are having a line, okay, and we are having a paragraph, and we are having a document. What is a document? A document is nothing but the collection of paragraphs. That means a document object is containing some paragraph objects. Similarly, a paragraph object may contain multiple line objects. So here multiple lines are present in paragraph and multiple paragraphs are present in document. That's nothing but a document is a composition of paragraphs and paragraph is a composition of line. Okay. And this aggregation is generally represented by a diamond symbol at the composite end, that is towards which the composite object is there. In that end we use the diamond. See here. So here document is composed of paragraphs. That means the document is a composite object. So a document we use the diamond symbol. It's similar to a line with a directed arrow, but instead of directed arrow here we are using a diamond symbol. Okay, so that is the aggregation. Next coming to the composition. So a slight difference will be there between the aggregation and composition. Coming to the aggregation, in the aggregation the lifetime of the three objects may vary. Suppose suppose if there is a single line, can we say there is a paragraph? No. So even though there is no paragraph, the line can be present. Okay, and even though there are at least two paragraphs, we can say the paragraph is present, but can we say the document is present? No. Why? Because we can't term a single paragraph as a document. That means the lifetime of the objects which are in which are having a aggregation relationship is different. But if the lifetime of the objects are same and are having some aggregation relationship between them, then that kind of relationship is called as composite relation. So this is the example for that composite relation. So here an order contains item. That means an order object is nothing but the composition of some items. So until the items are there, the order will be present. If at all there are no items, then obviously there will be no order item, that is no order object. Okay, so here the lifespan of both order and item objects is same. That means there is an aggregation and that aggregation is a composition. Okay, and we can also represent the composition just like an aggregation, but here the diamond is darked. Okay, see here, identify the difference. So here a diamond which is in aggregation just we use a simple diamond, and in composite we use a darkened diamond. Okay, so that's the difference between the aggregation and composition relationship. Both are similar but they differ only in their lifelines. And the last one comes to the dependency. A class is said to be dependent on another class if any changes to the another class necessitates a change to be made in to the dependent class. That means if at all a change is done in one class is reflecting or is affecting on the other class, then we can say these two classes are dependent. So whenever there is a dependability, whenever the dependency among the classes increases, then obviously we lose the cohesion and that is we will be losing the feature of high cohesion and low coupling. That means here the coupling level increases, it leads to the high coupling. So obviously whenever there is a high coupling, then we can't understand the design process completely. So this relationship should be avoided. That means it should be very less. Okay, a dependency relationship between two classes shows that any change made to the independent class would require the corresponding change to be made to the dependent class. Dependencies among the classes may arise due to reasons like a method of a class takes an object of another class as an argument, or a class implements an interface class. In this case, dependency arises if some properties of the interface class are changed, then a change becomes necessary to the class implementing the interface class as well. So this is how we represent the dependency among the two classes. Okay, suppose this is an independent class. If any changes that are done in this independent class are reflecting the another class, then that another class is called as a dependent class. Okay, so this dependent class is depending on independent class. So just represent, we can represent that dependency just by a dotted line and an arrow which is pointing towards the independent class. Okay, so this is how we represent the dependency. So this is all about the relationships among the classes. Next comes abstract class. So what do you mean by abstract class? So the classes that are not intended to produce instances of themselves are called abstract classes. That means these cannot be instantiated. Okay, so whenever the class is cannot be instantiated, then why to define it? Why to define such a kind of abstract classes? So the reason is they are simply used to represent the common behavior of a variety of classes that can be factored into one common location where they can be defined once. That means abstract classes merely exist so that behavior common to a variety of classes can be factored into one common location where they can be defined once. If at all three classes, in the three classes, if at all there are some common features or some common properties, then all these common features can be represented by using a single class. That's nothing but an abstract class. Okay, in order to represent the common properties or the common features of a variety of classes, we are making use of this abstract class. And the definition of abstract class helps us to push reusable code up in the class hierarchy and thereby enhancing the code reuse. So these abstract classes are helping us to have a code reusability. Abstract classes usually support generic methods and their subclasses provides concrete implementation of these methods. For example, in a library of automation software, issuable can be a abstract class and the concrete classes can be book, journal and CD. Concrete classes like book, journal and CD are the derived classes. So all these classes that is can be issuable, but the way these are issued may differ. Okay, the issuable class may define several generic methods such as issue, but the issue procedure will be different for a book, journal and CD. Okay, and it does not help to code reuse but helps to standardize implementations of the issued method across different concrete classes. So this is how we are representing an abstract class. So here issuable is a base class and journal, book and CD are the derived classes. Okay, so here we can use a issue method. Okay, but here the issue method in all these three classes, journal, book and CD are overridden. That is, the issue book will be implemented in different manners for a book, journal and CD. Next, so now we had seen different classes and class relationships among those classes. Then how to identify what kind of relationship exists between these classes. So in order to identify the classes and their relationships, first we should analyze the sentences given in the problem description, that is the sentences given in the SRS document, and then identify the nouns in the sentences. So these nouns in the sentence often denote the classes and the relationships are indicated by certain keywords. For example, if at all there is a composite relationship between two classes, then the two classes may be explained or may be described in the problem description, like a B is a permanent part of A is made up of B's, or A is permanent collection of B's. Okay, so whenever you find certain kind of keywords like permanent, made up, permanent collection, okay, so in that case you can identify that there is a composition relationship between these two objects or between these two classes. So here we had identified the nouns A and B. So those are nothing but the classes, and whatever the keywords that are used here for describing the relationship between these two classes are relevant to the composition. next, aggregation. So in order to identify aggregation, we can identify some keywords like a part of, contains, collection of. Okay, B is a part of A contains B, A is a collection of B's. Okay, so then you can identify that there is a aggregation relationship. Next comes inheritance. A is a kind of B, or A is a specialization of B. A behaves like B. Okay, so here a kind of, specialization, behaves like, even generalization. Okay, so these are the keywords which are used to identify the inheritance relation. Next, association. A delegates to B, A needs help from B, A collaborates with B. Okay, so these are the keywords which are used to represent the association relationship. Now next, let us discuss about the other key concepts, that is abstraction. So already we had seen the abstraction mechanism. Okay, so it is a selective mechanism of certain aspects of a problem while ignoring all the remaining aspects of the problem. And the main purpose of using this mechanism is to consider only those aspects of the problem that are relevant to a given purpose and omitting all the aspects of the problem that are irrelevant. So this abstraction in the object-oriented design, the abstraction can be implemented in two different manners. One is the feature abstraction and the other one is the data abstraction. Coming to the feature abstraction, here every class is simplified representation of its derived classes and retains only those features that are common to all of its children class and ignores rest. So that means in a parent class we can see all the features, that all the common features that are available in its child class. Okay, so that's a kind of generalization. Okay, so that it is also a, and that kind of inheritance mechanism, that is in the in inheritance we had seen the generalization specialization relationship exists. Okay, so that kind of generalization specialization relation mechanism is provided by feature abstraction. Okay, thus the inheritance mechanism can be thought of as providing feature abstraction. That is, generalization specialization is providing us feature abstraction. Next, coming to the data abstraction. The data abstraction implies that each object hides from other objects the exact way in which it stores its internal functionalities. So that means obviously we know there is a data abstraction in object oriented concepts, like we can invoke an object can make use of the data of other object only by invoking its method. That means the object is hiding all its details from the other objects until and unless its method is invoked by other objects. Okay, so in that manner it is providing data abstraction. And the main advantage of this data abstraction is it reduces coupling among various objects, that is dependencies among the various objects. So therefore it leads to a reduction of overall complexity of a design and helps in easy maintenance and code reuse. So next key concept is encapsulation. So objects communicate with other objects through messages. The data of an object is encapsulated within its methods. That is, the hiding of an object within a method is called as a encapsulation. To access the data internal to an object, other objects have to invoke its method and cannot directly access the method. Okay, and coming to the advantages of encapsulation, first one is it protection from unauthorized data access. Okay, unless and until the other object invokes the method of the object, then it cannot access the data of that particular object, right? So that's what protection from unauthorized data. Okay, next is data hiding. So this encapsulation implies that internal data structure of an object are hidden so that all interactions with the object are simple and standardized. This facilitates reuse of class across different projects. Furthermore, if the internal data or the method body of a class are modified, other classes are not affected. Why? Because the data is hidden and the data is there is no dependency, or there is a less coupling among these data items in the objects. Okay, and this also leads to easier maintenance and bug correction. And the next advantage is weak coupling. Obviously, yes, there is a weak coupling. Why? Because there is no dependencies among the data items. That is, the degree of dependencies among the data items is very less. Okay, obviously, it's nothing but a low coupling or weak coupling. So this is simply a schematic representation of an encapsulation. So here we are having a data, and this data is completely surrounded by various methods, and we can access this data only by invoking these methods. That is, these methods are acting like a boundary wall, or they are protecting the data. Okay. Next comes polymorphism. So it literally means polymorphism, that is many forms. So this denotes that an object may respond in different manner when the same operation is invoked on it. That is, if at all any objects behaves in different manner whenever the same method is invoked on it, then that is called as a polymorphism. That is many forms of an object. So there can be two types of polymorphisms in object orientation concepts. One is the static polymorphism and the other one is the dynamic one. Now let us see the static polymorphism. So generally it occurs where multiple methods implement the same operation. Whenever multiple methods implement same operation, then it is called as a static polymorphism, and it is also called as static binding. For example, let us consider a class name circle has three definitions for create operation. So one is without a parameter, and one is one create operation with a center and radius as parameter, and the other one is create operation with center, radius, and fill type as a parameter. So depending on the parameters, the method will be invoked, and the method create is said to be overloaded. So that means here the create method is having three different forms. Okay. So one is a create without any parameters. The second one is a create with two parameters, that is with radius and center. And the other one is create with a radius, center, and fill type. Okay. So here the circle class is having overloaded three create methods with are overloaded. Okay. So here depending on the method we call, we get different kinds of output. Okay. Next, coming to the dynamic polymorphism. So this dynamic polymorphism is also called as dynamic binding. So here the exact method that would be invoked on a method call can only be known at the runtime, that is dynamically, and cannot be determined at the compile time. The exact method which can be invoked can only be known only at the runtime. But whereas in static binding, so here we can like depending on depending on, suppose if I had called like if I had taken any object like abc dot create, I had not given any parameters, then what happens? Then this create method will be executed. If at all I had given like abc dot create x comma y, then this second create method will be executed. That means I know which method will be invoked at the compile time itself. Okay. But that cannot be known in dynamic polymorphism. Okay. So that's the difference between the static and dynamic. So it is based on, this dynamic polymorphism is based on two important concepts. One is the assignment of an object to another compatible object, and the other one is method overriding. First, let us see the assignment of an object to another compatible object. An object of a derived class can only be assigned to an object of a base class and not vice versa. That means an object of derived class can only be assigned to an object of base class, but the object of base class cannot be assigned to an object of the derived class. Okay. So that means if you consider two classes A and B, Here A is the base class and B is the derived class. We can assign the object of the derived class, that is object of B, to object of A. Okay, so that means let us consider we are having small a and small b are the objects of class capital A and capital B. Then we can have A equals to B. That means we can assign derived class object to base class, but we can't assign uh, base class object to derived class. Okay, so this is not B equals to here should not be done. Let us consider a class hierarchy of different geometric objects. The display method is declared in a shape class and overridden in each derived class. A single call to the display method for each object would take care of displaying the appropriate element. So here in the shape class we are having again three classes: circle, rectangle, line. Okay, and again a circle we are having a ellipse, and again in rectangle we are having a square, again in square we are having a cube. Okay, so this is the class hierarchy of the geometric objects. So here in the traditional code, like if at all you go for a procedural oriented one, we can write in this manner, like either procedural oriented or just if at all you are using any static polymorphism, you can write the traditional code in this manner. But in object oriented code, so you can use it in this manner, just shape dot draw will leads to the, like it can be used to draw either a circle, rectangle, or line. So depending on the parameters you had given. Okay, next comes genericity. So it is the ability to parameterize class definitions. Parameterize class definitions. For example, defining a class stack of different types of elements such as integer stack, we can have a character stack and floating point stack. Okay, a class stack can be of different types. It can be integer stack, it can be character stack, or it can be floating point stack. If at all we are not having this genericity concept, then we need to define the stack in three times separately. But because of this genericity, it's we can define this generic class stack as a first we can define simply the generic class stack, and later we can instantiate it either as a integer stack or character stack or a floating point stack as per our requirement. And this can be achieved by assigning a suitable value to a parameter used in the generic class definition. Next comes related technical terms of object oriented concepts. The first one is persistence. Persistence is nothing but the existence of an object. Okay, so objects usually get destroyed once the program completes its execution. The persistent objects are those that live across different executions. That means even though the program has completed its execution, if the object is live, then that kind of objects are called as persistent objects. That means these persistent objects are present permanently. And this can be done if we are maintaining the copies of the object in secondary storage or in any database. Okay, then we can say they are the persistent objects. Next comes agents. So generally an object, that is a passive object, is one that performs some action only when requested through invocation of some of its methods. That is, generally an object reacts only when one of its method is called. Such a kind of objects are called passive objects. But coming to the agents, they monitor events occurring in the application and takes action autonomously. That means until the complete task is completed, these objects will be in a activation state itself. That means they are completely monitoring the events. They monitor the events, and depending on kind of event that has occurred, they are performing certain actions. Okay, they are performing certain automatic actions. Okay, Such a kind of objects are called as agents, and these agents are also called as active objects. For example, in a database application such as accounting, an agent may monitor, that is, an active object may monitor the balance sheet and would alert the user whenever inconsistencies arise due to some improper transaction taking place. So here that whatever the object that is alerting the user, that's nothing but an active object. Next comes the widget. Widget is the short form of window object. So generally we'll be making use of these widgets whenever we are creating the graphical user interfaces. That means we come across this widget concepts while discussing about the user interface design. More complex widgets can be derived from the basic widget using the inheritance mechanism. So, window object, generally widget is nothing but whatever the window, that is a rectangular screen that appears to you on the monitor, that's nothing but a window. And in that window you will be having certain options or certain options which internally execute certain commands. Okay, so those options are, that is icons which you see, those are nothing but the widgets or window objects. For example, in whenever you open any word file, you can say edit option. Okay, so that edit is a kind of window object. Okay, it is a widget. Okay, so generally these widgets, that is these window objects, will have some geometric attributes, and it can also have some methods. The geometric attributes may be like its a size, color, font shape, etc. And its properties can be like resize, draw, minimize, maximize. Okay, all this can be the properties of that widgets. The method supported by a widget manipulate the stored data and carry out certain operations like resize window, iconify window, destroy window, etc. So these are becoming the standard components of GUI design. Coming to the advantages of object oriented development. So the main advantage of going for object oriented approach is the code and design reusability, and it increases the productivity, ease of testing and maintenance, better code and design understandability, enabling development of large programs, elegant design because of loosely coupled highly cohesive objects which are essential for solving large problems. These are the advantages of object oriented development or object oriented concepts. The main code and design reusability is because of inheritance. Okay, and better code and design understandability is because of abstraction. We are having both data abstraction and feature abstraction, and this abstraction is also helping us to have a loosely coupled and highly cohesive objects. Okay, next, the main advantage among all these advantages is improved productivity, which comes about due to a variety of factors such as code reuse, simpler and more intuitive abstraction, better problem decomposition. So the data abstraction, inheritance, all these features of the object oriented concepts are indirectly helping to lead to the improved productivity. Okay, so just like advantages, we can also find some drawbacks in object oriented design. Whatever the features that have led to the advantages of object oriented design, they also have some drawbacks. They are also the reasons for having some drawbacks in object oriented design. For example, if you consider the concepts like the features like abstraction, data hiding, inheritance, they do occur runtime overhead due to the additional code that gets generated on account of these features. So, in order to implement these features, we need to generate some additional code. So, because of which it slows the production process, that is the project time, that the duration of project completion may become later, that is it may lag the project completion time. and here the data is not centralized, whereas in procedural implementation the data is centralized one, but in objects the data is scattered among various data items. So therefore the spatial locality of data becomes weak, and this leads to higher cache miss ratios and consistently to larger memory access times. This finally leads to the increased program runtime. So in that manner it is slowing down the project. Okay, so whatever the features we had thought we had thought are best advantages to the object oriented design, they are also providing some drawbacks the major drawback is they are slowing down the project process. Okay, so this is all about the object oriented concepts. And in the next revision session, let us discuss about object oriented design approach. Okay, thank you.